let's see, but you have to kind of get, well, maybe not too close, because you have to see both of you.
One of you can sit in the other's lap.
You might want to see a little bit more of Chris. Unless, let's see. Okay, now it's pretty good. Okay, so the lower third, guys, is this thing over here. Let me just do it a bit fast. So, you go over to the side, and it's just a little box here. It's right there. You click that. That opens over here. And you're going to click this little profile right there, the person. And then you put your name, both names, maybe. Where it says Connie Walker, put both your names, and then put, I don't know if you have time to do it.
Logo?
It's just choose logo, but so Jim Benya. Just say, no, Jim Benya and Chris Monrad. Say. Use an ampersand if you need to. Put an ID, logo as well, an ID if you want. Yeah. Oh, just turn them on. Oh, it has my face. You might want a logo. Okay. But anyways, all right. Shall we start?
I think we're ready.
Should we start?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Can you hear them?
Mm-hmm.
I guess you can because you can hear me. Okay. Are you guys too far away, or you're okay? You want to tilt your screen a little bit down? Okay. There you go. Okay. And maybe a little bit to your, more towards me, the screen. Okay, well, let's go start. Okay, we're going to start. Did we already start broadcasting? It says it's live. Oh my goodness.
There
Okay. Hi, everybody.
Okay, well, I think it's live.
All right. I have to stop laughing for a moment. All right. Do you want to take over?
Yeah, I'll take over. Hi, everybody. This is Kelly Beaton from the International Dark Sky Association, welcoming you to the 5th in a series of Google Plus Hangouts that we're having to show you all the different aspects of light pollution and how those are impacted in various ways. We've had 4 of these so far, but at first I want to maybe introduce some of the people that we have here before we get into that. We have a stacked deck tonight in terms of the horsepower that we have for the presentations. First of all, I need to have a shout out to Connie Walker, who's doing the moderating for us in the background. You see Connie there. She has been the coordinator, the admin, and she'll be behind the scenes making sure that everything runs smoothly. She's at the National Optical Astronomy Observatory's offices in Tucson, Arizona. She's joined there by 2 of our other experts. I'm not sure. We need to get them to say hi so that we can see them. Jim and Chris, you want to say hi?
Hello. Hello.
There they are. Okay, so Jim Benya and Chris Monrad are joining us. Chris is a long time lighting designer from the Tucson area. He's the vice president and principal for Monrad Engineering. He's been at this for 30 years. It seems, Chris, you don't look nearly old enough to be at it that long. He's been devoted to the IDA for many years. He's been on the board. He's been past president. He's also got his hand in the other side of things as an official with the IESNA. He once was president of the South Arizona section. Joining him is Jim Benya, who is from the Northern California area, a place near and dear to me. And Jim has also been in this game a very long time. He's won hundreds of national and international lighting design awards, has been very active in getting the energy code in California, in particular Title 24, to be dark sky friendly, and also has served a long time on the board. And then finally, we need to welcome Darcie Chinnis. Darcie, you want to say hi so we can see you?
Hi.
Oh, we can't because Connie has already sent it over to program mode. But Darcie is joining us from the offices of Clanton and Associates in Boulder, Colorado. Darcie is an up-and-comer in the world of lighting design. She's got a PhD in the subject, and she's been active especially in energy code and in working with local communities to develop lighting ordinances. She's one of our experts on the model lighting ordinance. So with that as a brief introduction, I don't want to take too long. Let me just give you a little bit of introduction about the IDA itself for those of you who might not know about us. We've been around since 1988, our job is to make everybody aware that dark skies are important. They're part of our heritage. It's a win-win for everybody to have intelligent lighting that puts the light on the ground. We like to say it's about dark skies, not dark streets, because our society really demands lighting. But there's a good way to do it and a bad way to do it, and the IDA is all for the right way to do it. Now, the reason that we're doing these Google Plus Hangouts has to do with the International Year of Light, which we're nearing the end of, and the IYL has one of its main themes, the cosmic light theme, and part of that theme is dark skies awareness. So IDA has been participating in the IYL since its inception at the beginning of the year. In fact, beforehand, we've been planning for some time. And our contribution is the 6 Google Hangouts. This is the 5th of those 6 to bring focus on the many ways that outdoor lighting affects us at night, our human health, how it affects astronomy, the environment, our safety and security. And tonight we're going to be focusing on how light pollution affects energy and energy efficiency. So with that as an introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Jim and Chris. They together with I think, Connie, I've kind of leapfrogged, and you can show the panels that talk about Jim and Chris and Darcie, and let people have a quick look at them. There's Mr. Benya, and next I think Darcie is there. There's Darcie. He's been very active, as I said, in lighting ordinances and on the Technical Review Council for the IES, the Illuminating Engineering Society. And then finally, last but not least, I've got Christian Monrad, who has, as I mentioned, been very, very active in the Tucson area. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the projects that he and Jim have worked on together. So, with that as introduction, I turn it over to Chris and Jim, who are going to take the first part of this. Gentlemen, take it away.
Well, okay. Hi, everybody. Yeah, a little bit of background. Chris and I have been working together both professionally on projects, and of course together on the IDA board, and serving now also together in the IDA technical committee. And this is something that's proven to be, we've grown a great friendship out of it. I want to tell you, it's been one of the highlights of my career in many, many ways. But one of the things that this has taught me, I've always been a believer that that an environmentally responsible lighting design and energy efficient lighting design could easily go hand in hand. It's almost like they were made for each other, and yet we've seen the growth in outdoor lighting go exponential, even since the great energy crisis that started this all in the early 1970s. So we think this is now we're on the verge of an opportunity where Chris is. So we can read that. Main topic is energy reduction via reducing light pollution. It's a beautiful idea. It's a simple idea, and it's one of those ideas that I'm surprised we're not much further along than we should be. I think part of it has to do with the fact that lighting, so much of outdoor lighting is just bad habits, and people really just put lights up without really thinking much about it. But in fact, you just remove the lights that weren't necessary. We used lighting that was more appropriate for the application. Light pollution would go away and the energy use would go down. But right now, we're on top of an era in which solid state lighting, LEDs, going to give us such capabilities to further reduce the amount of energy used. We're at a wonderful crossroads of an opportunity where we can finally start to achieve significant light pollution reduction. Because if you look at this particular slide, typical of a lot of outdoor lighting that's in the world today looks like this. Half the light is going up in the sky, not only wasting energy, but causing light pollution. What if we just didn't do that anymore? What if we did the right thing every time, finally? So the work that I've done, and Nancy Clanton, Darcie, and others have done in the way of working on lighting ordinances and controlling light pollution through laws and regulations is one way to do it. But I think there's just common sense. We make things better in a lot of ways, but to make a difference too. So this slide really talks about, yeah, there's an efficient, cost-effective, and properly shielded LED replacement for almost every legacy lighting system. If we just replace the legacy lighting systems that aren't properly shielded and are generating too much light with LEDs that were properly shielded and generate the right amount of light, we're going to cut light pollution measurably. What do you think, Chris?
Absolutely. Again, this slide shows basically 1950s style floodlighting that is still pervasive throughout many parts of not only the USA but throughout the world. And it's unconscionable that we're still using 50 or 60-year-old lighting practices in this century when we know how wasteful floodlighting technologies are and how much they drain natural light. So we really need to change the way people think about lighting and stop lighting things the way we've always done it just because that's the way we've always done it. It's very lazy and wasteful.
So this is, this should almost be a, you want to advance a slide, whoever's got that? Connie, are you doing that? Okay. Here's an image, a picture at a mine here in southern Arizona. It's a project in which Chris and I are actively working. We're trying to show the mining industry in general how, with a few simple changes, they could reduce their light pollution footprint by 75–80% compared to what they do today. And simple changes, they don't necessarily cost more money. They don't necessarily, they're not going to save money, probably. What they do is they pay attention to what they're doing. And this, the unshielded floodlight on the right-hand side of this photograph, is what happens in most of the world. And there's other options, particularly the fully shielded options to the left, that light the same area that you're really interested in just as well, but actually with less glare, you can see better.
Yeah, that's a great point. If you look at the unshielded floodlight on the right, that's actually unsafe, and that as you're walking towards that building, you really can't see where you're going, and that you're fighting the glare with squinting your eyes or tipping your head down. And given that mine sites are so safety conscious, it's still quite surprising, me and Jim, where we see these unshielded floodlights that are counterproductive to human vision as compared to the fully shielded installation on the left that very carefully lights the task area and imparts a very low glare scene, thus helping the workers to maintain their night vision to a great extent.
I think a little bit later when Darcie has the podium, Darcie, I hope you talk about some of the work that you and Nancy have done with the Department of Defense and other places where many times when a lighting study is done, there's always this belief you put in more lighting, which generally means more glare, but you get greater safety and security. And I know that your work has proven in a number of cases that less lighting is actually more secure and more safe. And I think we're beginning to realize that worldwide. So, Connie, you got another slide for us? So this
one.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. So this is showing what we call a candle power diagram. And what it is, it's like you take a section through a fixture in the vertical plane. So in the fixture to the right, this is where the light goes from a floodlight. The area that's colored in is light distribution measured in candle power or candela. And what happens with a floodlight that's tilted vertical, so it's just shooting straight out to the side, almost more than half the light goes up into the sky, just totally up into the sky. Sometimes if a light can be down, then it starts to become a little bit more opportune, but you're still putting a significant percentage of the light up into the sky. Next slide. That's conventional floodlights. This is what happens when we use a forward throw, fully shielded luminaire, in this case, an LED luminaire. All of the light goes below the horizon line. The peak light, peak beam, the strongest beam to the right, where it says peak beam output, that peak beam is at the same place as the peak beam from the floodlight we were just looking at. And it's just as strong. But there's no uplight. There's nothing different about this other than using the right luminaire. That's it. And there's no cost addition. There's no reason not to do this, other than the false logic that lay people use. Say, okay, I'll buy a light and I'll point it in that direction, and they buy the simplest floodlight they can find. But in fact, if you know a little bit about the physics and a lot about the way lighting works today, a modern luminaire that does this takes care of the problem without any uplighting glare.
And touching on our subject for this evening, which is energy savings through light pollution reduction, from our various case studies and projects that we've actually installed, we easily replace legacy floodlights that are tipped up or tipped parallel to the ground with solid-state LED solutions that typically use about between 60 and 85% less energy. So we're not only reducing light pollution by big numbers, 80, 90%, we're also saving a lot of energy in the process, which helps finance the lighting conversion from the 1950 style floodlight to the modern LED fixture with high-performance optics.
Hey, Jim and Chris, before we move on to the next slide, I had a question. Oops. Connie, yeah.
That's okay.
That plot, the thing about LEDs is that they are intrinsically basically no uplight. But this particular plot shows something really important. They have the capability of throwing a lot of light out to the side. And this is dangerously close to what we call the glare zone. So not all LEDs are as good as this one in terms of controlling, that side-thrown light and the glare. Isn't that right?
Well, man, you really stepped into one here. Glare is a function of how bright the light source is, and if you happen to be standing at that perfect angle where you're looking at this luminaire, it's going to be glaring and it's going to be bright. This is one of the hot topics of LED lighting, is how can we have this fantastic control, the ability to pinpoint a light source, and light exactly the spot we want to light, and yet not create glare at the same time. It's kind of hard to do.
Yeah, that said, this particular optic, it was just one of our case studies where we were, in this case, we were replacing airfield lighting, where we were trying to push a lot of light out away from poles to cover aircraft parking areas and maintenance areas. So the fact that we picked this particular luminaire was for a specific task, whereas if we didn't need the light to be pushed out as far from the pole as it was in this application, we would pick any number of different beam shapes that would have less light in that glare zone or near the glare zone. And that's one of the really magical parts about LED, is the number of different optical beam patterns that you can select from or even get customized to suit your various application. With the old legacy systems where we're dealing with light bulbs and we're trying to reflect or refract the light where we want it to go with I'll say, limited success, the LED products and their high-performance optics really give us a lot of tools that we never ever had before, where we can manage that glare better than we could with some of the HID sources.
I'm going to go ahead and close the next slide here. So this is a photograph taken of Tucson International Airport. This is a project that Chris did last year, pretty much. And in the left portion of the photograph, you see the relatively white colored lights, and then more to the right in the foreground, you see the yellow colored, which are the legacy high pressure sodiums.
Hotspots.
And the hotspots, the high pressure sodiums, and you look to the left, you see how the light levels are very smooth. This project shows off all the capabilities of LEDs. Significantly reduce the amount of energy, significant, huge. It was like 70–80%, something like that.
In some applications, project total, we ended up saving 60% of the energy throughout all of the different lighting applications. These 50-foot poles were up in the 70% range. We had some other lower mounting heights where we didn't get quite those numbers, but all told, the airport is saving $150,000 a year in energy, plus another $100,000 a year in maintenance, such that this project will have less than a 4-year payback period, and therefore, from every year going forward, they'll be saving $150,000 in energy and $100,000 in maintenance. One big bonus to this project was also the fact that Tucson Electric Power Company gave the airport an upfront incentive, which was equivalent to 1 year of energy savings. So they actually took 1 year off of the payback period with that $150,000 rebate.
I think one of the things viewers should look at in this slide is when you look at the roadways to the left part of the slide, the light levels seem very even, very easy to see what you're doing. Whereas if you look at the parking lot more in the center and center to only to the right of center, you see it's very spotty with real hot spots and really darker areas. In fact, the average light level in the area with the whiter lights to the left, the average light level is actually a bit lower. Here's how some studies that Chris did, and here's where he showed the LED. The average light level is only about 15 lux, or about 1.5 foot candles, whereas with the original high pressure sodium it was 50 lux. Well, when you reduce the average light level 3 times, you're reducing the potential for light pollution. So, first off, one of the big advantages of LED is you can light everything to lower light levels because it spreads the light so much more evenly. And that's a critical thing a lot of people don't understand. But this project is the perfect example, in fact, if not a world-class example, of how to do it, how to reduce not only the energy footprint of outdoor lighting, reduce the footprint into the sky. That's the next slide. Well, we'll show you a few of the slides. You can see there's nothing wrong with light. In fact, we've gotten great comments back from people who work at the airport that they feel that they can really see better. The light is even, the light is smooth, and the color of the light's actually really good. A lot of people think 3000K lamp lighting, street lighting, everything would be too warm, too yellowish. You don't see any of that here. In fact, it's a great color. It's the color of lighting that we tend to love. You can have some halogen lighting, and it works great. So this is some data from that project. But I think it's important to realize that these are the benefits. A 73% reduction in environmental light emissions. That's lumens just into the environment. Whether they go down or whether they go up, they go into the environment. It's important to remember that even fully shielded downlight bounces. And so that if you reduce the number of lumens into the environment, make a difference. And so here there's a considerable reduction. 22 mega, that's million lumens, down to 6 million lumens. That's significantly less impact. The photopic to photopic ratio, this is kind of a detail. If people know anything about this, they're probably familiar with what these numbers mean. I'm not going to try and explain them right now, but it's what this is really saying is the new lighting system has a little bit higher photopic to photopic ratio, which will probably improve the night vision of people working in the areas. But it's not doesn't have horrible impact because we've reduced the total number of megalumens to begin with.
And what was interesting about this project is even though we had these theoretical calculations about the lumen emissions into the environment, really not theoretical, they are empirical. But we were actually able to measure the brightness of the airport from a polar orbiting satellite known as the Suomi NPP satellite system. And the airport actually got dimmer as viewed from space. That was very gratifying to see that we actually made a measurable difference in reflected light from the airport that was visible, not just something that was spat out on a calculator. So through various means, including space-based observations, we can quantify the successes that we have in these relighting projects to where they become even stronger case studies and precedents for expanding these applications throughout the world, literally.
This is a photograph. This is taken from.
This is taken from the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory about 20 miles south of the Tucson airport. This basically shows most of the Tucson metropolitan area from the 7,000 foot, 8,000 foot peak at the Smithsonian. The next few slides will show some views from the foothills of Tucson to the north of the airport, where we again got some outstanding visible results that showed the progress we've made in this relighting project. The top image shows basically floodlights like we showed in our first slide, tipped up floodlights lighting the aircraft parking areas viewed from 15 miles north of the airport. Those four big orange pink flares there were the pre-existing high-pressure sodium floodlights. And on the far right of the screen, that vertical pink element you see is the airport control tower. It has some very unique neon signage on it. It's a great landmark of Tucson. So the bottom image shows the after condition after we replaced all of those tipped up high-pressure sodium floodlights with fully shielded LED. When my colleague Joe Frenet of the Southern Arizona IDA section went out to take the after photo, he actually had to call me and ask me for a point of reference, and that he literally couldn't find the airport to take that second photo until I gave him some bearings, and that the floodlights he was used to seeing for the last 25 years since he's lived there had literally disappeared overnight. So,
yeah, that's the good news. It looks like something in the lower left there got worse over time.
Yeah, actually, I think that's traffic. I think those are headlights coming up one of our major thoroughfares into the foothills.
Oh, okay.
So that does show that headlights can cause light pollution. We haven't quite figured out how to regulate those yet, and I doubt we will. But certainly demonstrative of their effects in the visual scene from vantage points high above the city of Tucson.
Robotic cars. That's it. Slide, Kenny.
I run to Darcie's.
Yeah. So just to wrap up here, I mean, we've been engaged, and we're continuing to be engaged in a number of projects where this is what we're going to keep doing, and showing people that less lighting, properly used, and have a much lower impact on our skies, to the point where we could start to significantly recover the night sky again. And that's going to be a big deal.
Agreed.
Great.
Great. So to continue Chris and Jim's story, I think it's important to understand, as we're talking about light pollution reduction, how can we as lighting designers and in the selection of our luminaires not only impact light pollution, but also reduce our impact on energy. The slide that's showing is from the work of Dr. Chris Badley out of the UK, and he is engaged in an amazing simulation effort where he takes luminaire distribution and models the interaction with the atmosphere to try and understand, to quantify how that light, that one distinct light, can impact light pollution. I think lighting designers, we have a gut sense of this, but I think his work has really strengthened that and showing that light that leaves straight up essentially is escaping the atmosphere. It's completely wasted energy. But not only that, the light that leaves near horizontal in that glare range, that red little pie, is the most significant contributor to sky glow as measured from a distance. So if you're outside of a metropolitan area looking back towards it, that wasted energy does nothing from a lighting standpoint, from a functional lighting standpoint. All it does is contribute to sky glow and waste energy. When we start to look at that angle B, so really 70 to 90 degrees above straight down, not only is this a significant contributor to sky glow, again, it's typically wasted energy, but it's also that glare sensation. And as Jim alluded to, when a lot of the studies have shown and repeated human experiments have shown that when that light is shining straight in your eyes, it becomes a safety issue. So if we have a lot of light in our parking lots that are shining at that 70 to 90 degree range, it makes everything else feel darker. And our instinct then is to light the next parking lot even brighter, and then the next parking lot even brighter. So by addressing this glare issue, it can really help to reduce this lighting arms race that you see fairly often. Really the key here is to emphasize, again, the more we can direct the light downward in that 70 degree and below angle towards the task that we're intending to, we can reduce glare and we can reduce that wasted energy. Connie, next slide. I think to recap as well, a lot of the information that they shared, LED has the opportunity, presents us with the opportunity to significantly change how we as lighting practitioners are approaching energy use, task lighting, as well as light pollution reduction. LEDs offer us unprecedented optical control. As Chris said, you can even customize the way that the light is coming out of these light fixtures to make it ideally suited for your particular application. Inherently, they're just more efficient sources, less energy for the same amount of light. And another important part is that they're easily controllable. Lighting doesn't have to be static. It doesn't need to be on all night long when nobody is in the parking lot. So add in the fact that you can turn LEDs off and dim them down easier and more effectively than many of the other older technology. All of this contributes to an opportunity to have less wasted light, which is less energy waste as well as less light pollution. Next slide. So I wanted to bring some data to the table. So what we're showing here is some of the work that we did with the state of California in looking at basically parking lot lighting and comparing metal halide, pulse start metal halide lighting to LED lighting. So as we go from dark to bright, we've got lighting zones 1 is our darkest in California to lighting zone 4 is the brightest. There is a big energy savings story, and I think that's fairly well understood. And the energy that we're seeing, these energy savings, are still coming from the warmer color temperatures, the 3000 K LEDs. This isn't necessarily pushing up to those really harsh blue LEDs that I think you see flooding that market early on. The dots that are showing, the green circles and the red diamonds, I think, are also a really big story. A lot of the pushback with LED has been that it's too expensive. And what we're showing here and what our studies have shown is that because, as Jim and Chris showed, you can optimize your spacing, you can get a much more even spread of light, you end up most likely having fewer lights. And so the major cost savings that you're seeing here is coming from the fact that we simply, in these scenarios, need less poles, we need less foundation, we need less controllers, we need less equipment, because that equipment is just more effective at doing what we're intending it to do.
Hey, Darcie, this is Kelly. Before we jump to the next panel, these little LZ numbers down at the bottom, this is an important sort of paradigm shift in the way we think about lighting. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Could you kind of describe what those LZs mean?
Sure. So, lighting zones, the intent of lighting zones is to establish what is the expectation of brightness. And the IES has taken a really strong stand in addressing that the expectation of brightness and therefore our visual needs are not the same in every location. So downtown Los Angeles doesn't necessarily need the same lighting requirements that a trailhead in urban or in rural California does. So the intent with lighting zones is to recognize that expectation of brightness will vary, that in the lower lighting zones there is no expectation of brightness. And in the higher lighting zones, because it's a built-up urban environment, our expectation would be of a higher brightness. And that really comes into play because we talk about the adaptation of our visual system. If we are dark adapted, we're in a very like a national park kind of environment where there is no lighting and we're dark adapted, there's very, very little additional light that's needed to be able to see something, to see the trailhead or the trash can at the trailhead. If you're in Los Angeles, downtown Los Angeles, and you're light adapted, your eyes are adapted to a much higher light level, then the expectation and the science shows that you do need higher light levels to be able to see that. So the IES is trying to, the IES and IDA, because this is also a concept that's in the model lighting ordinance, is attempting to address that variation in brightness by adjusting criteria and by adjusting requirements to reflect that.
Want the next slide?
Yes, please.
Sorry, it's not.
And so more than, Connie will show it on the next slide, but more than just energy and cost efficiency, because as a lighting designer working with a building owner, those are two major concerns that they have. But greenhouse gas emission savings potential is also a significant thing to consider. Just the switch from HPS from older technologies to LED technologies can save upwards of over 50% greenhouse gas emissions. What I hope the takeaway here is that the gray bars there that are shown on the right are what happens when you start to layer in controls. And so the idea with this is if you have part night controls, say for the first 6 hours of a 12-hour night, my lights are on at full brightness, and the next 6 hours I dim them down by 50%. I can even further reduce my greenhouse gas emissions. So as we talk about wasted energy, as we talk about greenhouse gas emissions, I think it's important that we don't consider it's not just a static picture, that LEDs are so easily controlled that we can turn them down and turn them off. And that's the second part of it. It's reduce your brightness, it's limit your output, but it's also turn them off when you don't need them. Next slide, Connie.
Yeah, and before you get into that, Darcie, I want to mention to those of you who might be online that we do have a Q&A ability here. So I see a couple of questions queued up from Audrey Fisher in Chicago, and we'll get to those at the end. But if any of you have questions that you want to ask, just make sure you just type them in your little say something window, and we'll get to them as best we can.
So to wrap up here, I think Jim and Chris presented a very strong argument and successful demonstration of what LED can do. But how do we capitalize on it? Because I think there's a fear of LEDs. There's been a lot of bad experience with early adopters to LEDs. We are at a place where LEDs are viable in nearly every application. So how do we capitalize on that? Our recommendation is lighting ordinances. There's typical components to a lighting ordinance that can be tuned to each municipality. How those lighting zones are applied and where. Lighting ordinances can limit or in some cases completely eliminate all uplighting to reduce sky glow. They can reduce glare, which can help adjust your brightness level that you're adapted to, but can also reduce the amount that neighbors are complaining about other neighbors. As Jim touched on too, limiting the total amount of light on a site is important. If we can reduce the total number of environmental lumens that are emitted, as Chris showed, there's measurable results that can be achieved from that. And typical lighting ordinances are going to limit that amount of light. We're seeing great ordinance work where controls are being required. And I think that's a wonderful piece that we consider that there's a temporal solution to this as well. And a lot of lighting ordinances are starting to address residential as well. So not just commercial property development, but really starting to deal with how do we get to the nitty-gritty of lighting and start to quantify the total amount of light our city has, how much of that is due to residential, and do we have a basis to start controlling that. So the joint IDA-IES model lighting ordinance is one that we've used to set the foundation. It's a great document that can provide some templates that have been vetted with lighting professionals to allow IES standard light level recommendations to be met. And the requirements in there are achievable, and I think in the experiences that we've had, especially very recently, cities are becoming more and more comfortable with the terminology that's in there to a place where these things are becoming extremely effective. So we're excited to see more and more groups adopting ordinances, and it'll be great to see the long-term measurable effects that we know will come from that. I think that's it.
All right, that's great. You know, I actually one of the things that is happening, and Jim and Chris alluded to this, the rollout of LEDs, powerful enough to provide streetlights, is offering a kind of once in a multi-generational opportunity to change how we light. As I understand it, most of the streetlights that we have now came about in the post-war World War II years, the 1950s and 60s, Westinghouse and there were tens of millions of streetlights put up fairly rapidly because the power was available and cheap. And so now we're dealing with those as a legacy, and for the first time in all those years, we're having a wholesale paradigm shift, really is the word that comes to mind, of how we can light our streets and how we can light our environment. I'm wondering if any or all of you can address, you know, how important it is, how important these LEDs are going to be in changing the entire landscape, what fraction of the lighting that we have to deal with is in fact from the street lights, and if you think there is this next few years really offers an opportunity to reduce light pollution nationwide, if not worldwide. A lot of questions there.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I'll wade into this one first. We have to look at the history of electrification in the United States to get started on this idea. When electrification began, it was a growth industry. The utility industries wanted to grow bigger and bigger to grow our country, to grow our economy. And so they started building power plants and more power plants. And what happened is as they built more power plants, more and more load was developed, and it was a growing system. Everything was fine, and everything was, you know, the way it should have been. Then along came the Arab oil embargo, 1973. Here's the system that's been going up and up like this. And all of a sudden, we came to realize that we were leaving on, and this was true, in 1973, we left on all the lights in office buildings and factories and everything all night long. We left on everything all night long. Matter of fact, most buildings were heated by the heat of lights. They didn't even bother to put in heating systems in many places. So what happened is that all of a sudden, we started turning off lights at night, indoor lights particularly. And so that electric load started going down. Although the daytime load was continuing to grow, the nighttime load started going down. So the utilities looked to seek to compensate for that by building the nighttime load with a lot more outdoor lighting. So in addition to street lighting, they started encouraging people to put in safety, security, and other types of lighting systems so that they could actually, grow that load back up. Because when there's a big imbalance, utilities have a real problem managing the traditional power plants that were built in those days too. So the utility companies have been struggling with this growing imbalance, and so as a result, there hasn't been a lot of incentive for us to reduce the amount of outdoor lighting because it was playing a very major role in stabilizing our electric grid. And so not only do we have an opportunity here, Kelly, with change in technology, we've got a couple other things going on too. One of them is the onset of the electric car and other things that can occur at night to use that energy instead of having to turn on lights and just burn it and throw a lot of it up in the sky. So I'd like to see us as a nation start looking at electric vehicles as one way to reuse that energy. And there'll be very positive environmental benefits from it by not burning all that CO2. The second thing that we can start to look forward to in the future is going to be the ability to store electric energy. The reason why the utilities have this big problem during the day is because that's when everybody does stuff. And at night, people don't do stuff. So there isn't that use on equipment and things like that. We haven't had a good way to store electricity. So batteries and other storage technologies are now hot stuff. They're starting to become a real possibility. So we can look forward to the day where we can reduce that daytime peak through storage and other ways, not to mention photovoltaics and some other stuff, which means we can even out the daytime and the nighttime, and we can start taking the energy we're putting into lighting systems, which frankly are over-designed in many situations. 50% of light pollution is from streetlights, 50%. So that's our big one. If we could turn them down, take advantage of this new technology, divert the electricity to electric cars and other uses, I can't see why this isn't a win-win. I really can't.
Yeah, I can't agree more with Jim. One great example of Jim's premise is the fact that throughout the United States, in any case, the vast preponderance of street lighting systems are owned and operated by the utility companies. In some municipalities, particularly California, the cities are actually acquiring the street lighting infrastructure from the utility companies so that they can put in their own street lighting systems to their own standards and save that energy that they're now paying the utility companies for these overly bright streets, and also tailor the color of the lights to match their communities better. As far as the energy saving story that Jim is speaking to with these conversions, I've just run numbers on a fairly large United States city, about 1 million people in its metropolitan area, and their street lighting conversion is going to save about 65% of their current energy use. So the same numbers that we spoke to earlier at the airport are holding very true when it comes to roadway lighting energy savings when converting from legacy high-pressure sodium systems to modern high-performance warm white LED systems. And as Darcie said, in the past, the more bluish or the more stark white LEDs were significantly more efficient than the warm white LEDs. However, that has all changed within the last year. The various chips that Jim and I tend to specify, the warm white LED is now only 6% less efficient than the starker white companion product. And now that we're within that 6% range, that's well within the accuracy of any illumination calculation software and laboratory reporting, to where, for as far as Jim and I are concerned, the warm white LED really has no energy penalty compared to the stark white products that are so prevalent throughout the country. So with these developments of improved warm white LEDs, the optical issues and benefits that both Darcie and I mentioned, uh, the revolution in street lighting for light pollution reduction, as well as energy savings. And if we're using less generated power, we're likely putting less particulates into the atmosphere, which also contribute to light pollution. So in many facets, the conversion from the responsible conversion from legacy sources to LED sources should be a net win for sky glow and light pollution reductions.
And
Darcie,
I fully agree with both, and it's actually timely because the poster behind me is a poster that we gave on a research study done in with Virginia Tech in Seattle. We deployed an LED street lighting system and had Virginia Tech Transportation Institute actually measure safe stopping distance. So the results were remarkable. Under LED lighting, that was 75% less light than high pressure sodium resulted in improved stopping distance. It was actually even safer from this study. So not only are you providing significant reductions in energy use and in light pollution, but for this one study, it provided results improving safety. So there's a whole additional element that cities can add into the discussion of street lighting, and we see this taking off with the creation and early adopters of adaptive lighting standards, where street lighting is being modulated based on the time of day. There's a lot of study that goes into that, where you review traffic patterns and you decide that during a certain period of the night, it's not warranted to have our street lighting on at its full levels. And so municipalities that have the control over their street lighting in this way, and that are on the forefront of this issue, are starting to look towards these adaptive standards to help them save additional money and reduce their environmental impact.
Yeah, Darcie, I want to continue with this if I can, and get to one of the questions from Audrey Fisher, who's one of our stalwarts in the Chicago area, Chicago is arguably one of the most light polluted cities in the world. She points out that the mayor, who's now Rahm Emanuel, is proposing switching over 1/3 street lights, park district lights and lakefront lights, to blue-rich LEDs, that is, with high color temperatures. I hope to convince them to turn off the blue-rich and turn to the stars. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It's, a lot of these cities that started down the path to LED conversion, say as little as 2 years ago, were angling toward these blue-rich LEDs because of the increased efficiency. And as Jim and Chris have pointed out, it's not that much anymore. How do we get to these city leaders and show them the many benefits of the warmer color temperature, not just from the reduction in the blue spectrally harsh end of the spectrum, but just for the better ambiance and color rendition that these LEDs provide?
Well, funny you should mention that. That's exactly what we did in Davis, California, where I live. And the city had signed a deal and started putting in the blue-rich, high color temperature LED streetlights. And they put in a bunch of them in the neighborhoods, and neighbors went crazy. Because when you replace high-pressure sodium legacy lighting with LEDs, not only does the color change, but a lot of other things happen too, and most of them aren't very desirable. And the community got angry. Davis is fortunately a community where the city council listens to the residents, and the city council meetings are well attended, and people voice their opinions. And so, getting a lot of pushback, the city said, okay, let's find out what people really want. And in neighborhood lighting, they did a mock-up, and they gave residents several weeks to choose among different choices. And they were 20 to 1 against the original 5,000 Kelvin bluish LED street lights that were about 30 watts. And they were 21.4 2700K, very warm-toned white light, at 19 watts. So the light levels were reduced 50%. The color temperature was reduced to a incandescent-like light. And the community said, this is great. And so those lights have now been replaced. Cost the city about $350,000, which is a lot of money for a city, community the size of Davis, about 65,000 people. But they were able to pay that off by using less energy. They dropped the power per luminaire by a third as well. So these things can happen, and they can happen really good. I think, frankly, Audrey, in Chicago, if they really wanted to make a difference, they could follow what we did in Davis, and they could reduce their light levels, reduce their light pollution levels, and have actually a nicer looking community that I think the residents would love.
Well, and maybe the folks in Chicago are paying attention to what happened in New York City, where I think it was more like 500,000 streetlights there, and they went with about a 4,000K rollout, and a lot of people are not happy with it. I think that was just like the case in Davis. So let's keep our fingers crossed for you, Audrey, that the cooler heads or warmer heads, depending, will prevail in the final selection.
I remember that there was some work a couple of years ago about just-in-time lighting, I think it's called, Darcie.
Yeah, there is. FHWA continues to work on it. It's really capitalizing on the technology that's in our vehicles. The concept is that street lighting, especially roadway, highway lighting, freeway lighting, would be off. And your car, the same technology that's being put into new cars that keeps you from hitting another car, it's the intelligence that's built into there. The idea with this study is that chipset in your car will actually start to talk to the lighting system. And so the freeway lighting would be off. And as you start to drive down it, it recognizes the speed with which you're traveling and lights your way. So the lights that need to come on just in front of you so that you could see a deer on the road or any other object that may be out there, and that the light would come on just in time as you drove down the highway. There's an installation where they're pushing the limits of this at Virginia Tech Transportation Institute, where they've gone in speeds up to, I think, about 95 to 100 miles an hour, and the system has been reactive fast enough to keep the roadway lighting on where it needs to be. So there's an example of more of that kind of reach concept. That's not something we're going to see in the next couple years, most likely, but the studies are there, and the opportunity to really, as I said earlier, to capitalize on the temporal aspect of lighting. It doesn't need to be static, and how can we use the technology that we're building into all of our other systems to improve that? And I think just-in-time lighting is a great opportunity out there.
There's another opportunity, which is to get rid of the freeway lights entirely. Mm-hmm. California does not have freeway lights, period, nowhere. Not when it's 7 lanes wide each direction and 400,000 cars a day in Los Angeles. Still no freeway lights. And people aren't dying at any faster rate than they do anywhere else. So I think there's, in addition to high-tech solutions, there's a lot of low-tech solutions, which is if you don't need lights, don't put them in the first place. Yep. And we need to do that just as much as anything high-tech, in my opinion.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm coming across, at least in Massachusetts, is that the tariffs, that is the rate structure that utilities have to live by, don't easily accommodate these kinds of technologies where you can, reduce the wattage or turn off a light at night. It's kind of antiquated. It assumes that a light is going to be on all night, and they base the cost for that accordingly. So I think it's going to require a change in the legislation and the oversight as well. We have just a couple of minutes left, and I'm wondering if if Darcie and Jim and Chris, if you have some final thoughts that you want to share, and then I'll wrap up.
Well, I'll start. I think the idea of addressing energy efficiency through light pollution, it's an argument that sells itself. When you design lighting efficiently, to focus on the task at hand and to reduce wasted energy, you solve that economic piece up front. And so one of the biggest challenges we see in market transformation is if there's not an economic justifier for it, it's much harder to get traction. There's no question that the economics are there to improve lighting distribution in a way that reduces energy use and reduces light pollution. So I'm of the opinion that it is a win-win. It sells itself from day one, and given that it has a strong justification on every project.
Well, I'll go second. I think that we all have got to be aware of what I was talking about earlier, is the critically important relationship between outdoor lighting and the nation's utility companies. The nation's utility companies are our grid. And we've got to make sure they're whole. We've got to make sure that they are successful. We've got to make sure they're there for us, because we're going to need them. We need them every day. And if you don't think so, a trip to the Middle East will remind you what it's like when you don't have a reliable grid. So our grid is important. Our utility companies are important. They're kind of in a corner right now because they saw investing in outdoor lighting as a way of stabilizing their system and providing a certain amount of revenue. Don't kid yourself. Utilities, somewhere in the neighborhood of about, on the average, probably 10% of their gross revenue comes from street lighting. That's a pretty big number, and it's a pretty big source of revenue to what are considered to be, it's a blue chip kind of revenue too, because they invest in the poles and they don't touch them for years except to change the light bulbs. They're very, very good investments. As they are weaning themselves from this, they need replacements, and we have a certain responsibility as a nation and a society, I think, to support that transition intelligently. Once we provide that system, they will be the leaders in this rather than the followers. Right now, they're the followers. They don't want to change because there's no economic reward for them. We've got to give them a reward, and I think if we solve that particular problem, we'll find that the changing outdoor lighting for the better will get increasingly easy, particularly in the big cities like Chicago and New York and other places where that energy economic equation is what is really holding us back.
Yeah, lastly, I'd just like to add that the quality of the lighting systems that we're talking about as far as the modern LED systems, when properly specified, they will provide a better public benefit in terms of safety and aesthetics and stopping distance, as Darcie said. The municipalities and utility companies need to look a little further beyond their bottom lines and look to the quality of life issues that are associated with good outdoor lighting systems. Because as we've seen in various locales, poorly done LED lighting is a real negative for the community, for human factors, and these communities are going to be stuck with these bad lighting systems literally for decades because there will be no capital to replace them. Davis is a very unusual circumstance where the community was so outraged that the city really had little choice but to respond, and the response cost them $350,000. And ultimately it cost the taxpayers of Davis. That money didn't come from the city council members, it came from the residents of the city. So in deference to Audrey, the more you can do on your local grassroots level, the better. And also, we've got so many lessons learned now over the last, I'll say, 5 years or 6 years of early adopters of LED lighting who've made some, I say, fairly bad decisions based upon bad information given to them at the time. we have nothing but really good installations to look forward to if we can get the decision makers to have open minds and listen to their constituencies and listen to the scientific community, not the lighting salesman communities, who often aren't telling the whole story.
Yeah, just one final point, I guess, is that principles of lighting design are, to a certain extent, what we're talking about here. Good lighting design reduces glare, gets rid of improper uses of light. And, when lighting design steps into the discussion, you stop and talk about glare control, color quality, and things like that. And far too often in street lighting systems, the decisions are made well before any of those thoughts even begin to occur. It's looked at as strictly a cost-saving, money-saving idea. I think if we look at it as a making of place, making of a community, you want the lighting to look good, you want the outcome to be welcoming and enjoyable, not feeling like you're living in a prison. And, if they replace all those lights in Chicago, it's the way they did in LA and a lot of other cities, with these very bright bluish white lights, people are going to feel like they're living in a prison yard. That's the last thing we want to have accomplished. I understand Cambridge, Massachusetts has decided to go warm, haven't they, Kelly?
Yeah, that's right. We have, and I think part of the issue here is that these city planners haven't yet been exposed to these nice 3000K lighting installations so they can see how beautiful it really is. So I invite you all over to Massachusetts, where we're having some success, or visit the Tucson airport to see Jim and Chris's work there. I think it's time to wrap up. Sorry, but Jim, Chris, thank you very, very much for joining us. I know you actually dashed over from the office. You've been working on some projects together. Darcie Chinnis, joining us from Colorado, is in the thick of it too, one of the young rising stars, so to speak, in the lighting industry. Connie Walker, our power behind the scenes, who set this all up. Just a final reminder that this is the fifth of six, what will be ultimately six Google Hangouts, and these are being archived, so you have a chance to see them later. Our sixth and final one will be coming up either in late November or early December on light pollution and our heritage of dark skies, and how we can finally turn the corner and regain that dark, pristine view of the sky that, Audrey, I know you want so much for the city of Chicago. So for more information, as always, you can go to the International Dark Sky Association's website. That's darksky.org, and where you can find this and many other great resources. I want to thank you all for joining us, and thank our guests as well. We'll see you down the road a little bit. Clear skies, clear dark skies to everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.